Hey everybody, welcome back to Mask of the Slasher. We are on our third episode of Joshtober! And we decided to change it up a little bit today. We had something else planned, but we had a pleasant surprise the other day.
We really did.
And we thought we should discuss it. You may have seen online. If you haven't, you should be following us online so you can see these things.
Indeed.
But we just hit our 1 year anniversary on Wednesday/Thursday.
Yeah.
According to YouTube, it's Thursday. Technically, it was Wednesday, though.
Right.
And that's pretty awesome for us.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know what we were going to do with this when we started. Josh suggested that we start this channel. It just gave us an outlet.
Yes.
I hate it when people say that. You're giving me a plug.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this is episode, I think it's 56 now. I think that's pretty good for an episode a week and then a couple extras here and there.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's pretty rad.
I agree.
We've gone through a lot of different changes, just aesthetically, really.
Oh, yeah.
Wednesday, when we decided to go to a show that I bought tickets for about a month ago.
Give or take,
yeah. And Josh said, "You know what? It's our anniversary," and I was like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah.
You know, I don't keep that on the calendar.
Surprise anniversary of Mask of the Slasher celebration.
Yeah, we thought it was a good one. And where did we go that night?
We saw Claudio Simonetti's Goblin in Portland.
Yes.
Woo-hoo.
I did buy seats that were up in the balcony. But this particular venue also has enormous pillars.
Yes.
And those pillars can cause problems as far as sightlines.
Yeah.
Because I know that they don't sell out shows. That was confirmed by a friend of mine who saw them in Salt Lake City 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So riots.
Right.
So I think the fact that it didn't sell out 100%, plus I do think some fear of that night.
Yeah, you've got one in the middle of the week, two the day after a hotly contested election. You know, it's bound to, some people are bound to be, unfortunately, for better or worse, nervous about going out after something like that. It just is what it is. I think it's just a timing issue.
Exactly. So when we got up to our seats and whatever, and we were watching a couple songs, and you could tell that even the floor wasn't full. The general admission seats down there weren't full, and I was like, let's go down there, because I like actually watching the musicians, not just as a whole. And aside from that, the screen that they had behind them, I think it wasn't intended to be that low,
right?
And so even seeing the visuals on the screen, which you would hope to see, it didn't really do any justice for them. So I would rather just focus on what the musicians were doing.
Right.
And so we did go downstairs, and so you'll see, I'm going to put pictures in this, obviously, but you'll see there's a variety of different places I took pictures, and you'll see the ones with the shitty pole in them.
Yeah.
And you'll understand why we went downstairs.
Right. I was not sure what to expect from this. I knew that Goblin toured, but I, never really read any reviews of shows or anything like that, just knowing that they toured. Didn't really see much out there in terms of set lists for this tour or anything like that. So again, didn't know what to expect, but pleasantly surprised by how full sounding it was. Very simple setup, just Simonetti on keyboards, a guitarist, a bassist, and a drummer, but just a very full sound. I was very pleasantly surprised and impressed by how great this show sounded.
It did start off really heavy with a song from the movie Mother of Tears. And while we're watching the clips and listening to everything, because there is some sort of backing track, because the vocalist that is in that song was not there.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. Yeah. And it's because it's Danny Filth of Cradle to Filth.
Yeah. And
at first I was like, is that him? And then I heard the scream, and I was like, it's him. It's him. And then some of the imagery in there, it's not like his bold face is right there, but it's definitely in there. And I was like, man, they came in hot.
Yeah.
They came in hot immediately. And then I was like, okay, because I was really anticipating it just being them playing the songs, kind of like John Carpenter did.
Right.
And that's it, you know, which I still loved the shit out of that, too.
Oh, yeah.
But that's what I was anticipating, but it was a very full sound, which was fantastic.
And that was one thing I did see online, and I can't remember if I saw it on Reddit or in the comments of something, on social media, but somebody had said it is much heavier live than on the records. And I was like, well, how's that going to work? But they definitely brought the heavy, and I thought that was really cool that they kind of modernized. I mean, it still sounds very much like Goblin, but they also at the same time kind of modernized it and made it a little heavier for the live.
Yeah, basically the melodies are same through and through. They do take some liberties with things and change things slightly, because he said, it's not easy to always adapt a soundtrack to that and have that same exact sound again. So they did change a little bit of things here and there, or just make it flow into other parts a little easier.
Yes.
But the drummer had a full kit.
Yeah.
Not like Tommy Lee full.
No.
He wasn't turning upside down and shit or anything like that. But he did have a full kit. The bass player was female. I think she did what she needed to, but I also don't feel like there was a huge amount of bass line emphasis in the songs in any way.
Right.
But I also don't feel like the original songs really necessarily had a lot of guitar emphasis.
True.
But yet, that guitarist, holy shit.
Yeah, he was amazing.
Amazing. Of course, the main, the head dog in this one is going to be the keyboards.
Yeah, uh-huh.
And holy cow.
Yeah.
Claudio Simonetti is an amazing player.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, woo!
Well, yeah, I was watching him play with both hands and doing two different things at the same time, and I was like, holy shit, how's he doing?
Yeah, it was bananas.
I mean, I guess he's been playing since he was a kid, obviously. I mean, they had to have been kids when they started, but holy smokes, it was amazing.
Yeah, he was 22, I think, when they did their first soundtrack. He was the oldest of the group.
Wow.
Yeah, if that tells you anything. So, and the only comparison I really have for something like this, for a synthesizer situation, I'm going to call it.
Yeah.
That's my new band name, by the way, Synthesizer Situation. But was watching Tangerine Dream.
Yeah.
And that man definitely had a lot more keyboards involved.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was a little wankery.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think that Claudio made good use of what he had, and he did use some more modern technology to keep things going and to have those backing tracks, or to add a track and hold it and continue, because you can't. Yeah,
it's just
it's a lot.
You can only do so much as one person,
Exactly. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought it was fantastic. They played some what I'll call deep cuts, I guess, songs I wasn't expecting. I expected Suspiria, Deep Red, the things like that of that nature. But they played like the theme from Sleepless and the theme from, as you said earlier, Mother of Tears, which is a more recent Argento film. And the Card Player, which also is a deep cut I wasn't expecting. So I thought it was very cool that you got to hear everything you wanted to hear, and then also for them to bust out some of the more lesser celebrated Argento films, I thought that was really cool. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely the familiarity of, most of those, that was pretty awesome. But also, he also brought in some stuff that you were not anticipating, and that would be the Halloween and Exorcist scores. The covers, yeah.
That was pretty rad in itself.
Yeah.
I was surprised.
Yeah.
But delighted.
Yeah. Well, that Halloween cover was off the hook.
It was amazing.
Like, I was like, how are they going to do this? Are they going to play it straight, or what are they going to do? But they definitely Goblinized that score. Like, because Goblin songs have a certain cadence to them and a certain tempo, a certain rhythmic style to them. And they definitely made that into a Goblin song, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, that's so cool. Totally made it their own, which I think that is the essence of a good cover, is to take that song that's somebody else's and to make it into your song. And they really did such a phenomenal job with that.
I will say this show, I mean, obviously most shows are loud. This show was very loud. And I think it was mostly because there is not great acoustics in these old buildings.
Right.
And so that sound is just bouncing. And it's very tinny sounding if you don't wear earplugs. We wear earplugs to all shows, no matter how lame it sounds.
Yeah.
We always wear earplugs. And I'm going to put the link in our description of these earplugs that we use, because they make it to where you hear everything you want to hear.
Exactly, and filter out all the junk.
Exactly. It doesn't muffle it like those stupid foam ones or whatever. These are fantastic, and they're reusable. Clean them in between, because that's gross, but reusable.
Yeah.
He did say that they were going to be touring again next year.
Yeah, for Deep Red's anniversary. So that's my favorite Argento film. So hopefully they come back here this way, because I'd be super excited to see that.
He said he was.
Yeah.
He said he'd come back to Portland. Well, I mean, get what you get. You've got to. Hopefully, it's a better venue.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, when I first heard about Goblin, obviously it was years ago. It was pre-you. But I didn't really do any major research into them and anything, for years. And I remember me saying to you, I don't know, a year or two ago, it would be really cool to go see Goblin, blah, blah, blah. And you were like, well, remember, there's 2 different Goblins.
Right.
And I'm like, okay. So obviously I knew that there was some sort of weird thing that happened, a falling out, because that's usually what happens when you have that situation. But I did not go into really looking into that until today. In his younger years, he decided he wanted to start doing music. His dad wanted to be a lawyer, and he was like, nah, son. And so he started doing music, and he formed a band. And that band has been known as a couple different things. It was Oliver, very exciting name, and Cherry 5.
That's the one I'd heard, yeah.
That's a weird fucking name. I'm sorry, it's weird. And even he said it was kind of weird. He didn't understand why they picked that. But nevertheless, that was what the band was called. Okay. So they're like, let's make a record, blah, blah, blah. And they go to the label. And the label's like, okay, yeah, let's do this. But then Dario Argento was like, yo, I got this movie coming out called Deep Red. Yeah. And I really want a band like Motley Crue or something big to record this. And the label's like, that's too expensive. But I happen to have this Italian rock band, and they're trying to release an album, and maybe listen to them. So Dario Argento goes to the studio to listen to them, likes it, and bada bing.
There you go.
The start of history.
Yeah.
Deep Red originally had a different composer, and that was Giorgio Gasolini, and a well-known composer. But him and Argento kind of had a falling out. So it all kind of worked in their favor. And so there was originally a different soundtrack to Deep Red, and it just got right out of there. So that's good, Suspiria, this was interesting. Argento wanted he wanted the music before the movie was done. And Claudio was like, I'm not a big fan of reading scripts and all that because it's just not the same,
right.
Obviously. You're not an actor. You're not going to get it.
Right.
But he had some music that was playing while they were acting out the movie and filming it. And then when it came to the film being done, he was like, and completely rewrote it. So let's do a whole nother soundtrack to this, But, I guess if he did it for Deep Red, why not Suspiria as well?
Right. And something to mention about Suspiria is that when we saw them at the show, they did an updated version of the theme from Suspiria. I believe you referred to it as the prog rock version, I believe. And it was really cool.
It was really good. And he said it's because you can't capture what you had in the movie. And it's true. Right. It's absolutely true. And, if he hadn't said anything, I probably wouldn't have really noticed. It just because the whole show sounded so full that I would have just been like, oh, that's why. Yeah. Yeah. But I think he did it so they could tour with it. And a couple years ago they started that. Right. Yeah. And it did sound good. Yeah. So Dawn of the Dead. So this one's a little weird too. So originally, George Romero used what they called library music. Probably just, obviously it's not like they have, sound files back then that they were just pulling out, but just use some basic bitch stuff. And then Argento, he was the distributor for Dawn of the Dead. And when he released it in Europe, he actually edited out 15 to 20 minutes of the movie and then put in Goblins music. And then when it got released in the US later on with Goblin sound, that became really popular. Claudio was just like, I need to take a break. And he decided to go back to Brazil for 4 to 5 years and just do disco.
Hey, why not?
It was, but after that, Dario Argento was like, I'm going to do this other movie, and I need another soundtrack, and that movie was Tenebrae. So, and if you notice these 3 movies, all of them sound totally different from each other. I mean, it's Goblin. Right. But it doesn't sound exactly the same, which is fantastic. And so when, when Claudio was like, okay, yeah, that's cool, and he tried to go back as Goblin, then the label was like, nah, son, the original bass player, he has Goblin, and they signed with newer artists or whatever. So they just went under their names. It was just 3 names, and one of them, ironically, though, was the bass player of Goblin. So obviously things weren't too terrible, right? Or so you would think. Right. Then it just gets messy from there. In 2000, they recorded the soundtrack to Sleepless. And then they were supposed to perform at some convention, and it didn't happen. And Claudio showed up, and he was like, old wounds, bro. Yeah. And it just didn't happen. And so this is how it kind of went from 2000 all the way to now, to where it's this revolving door of different people, whatever.
Right.
But Claudio eventually formed a band called Demonia, and those are the members that are in the band today.
Okay. Because I remember like however many years ago it was, there was Goblin, and then there was like I remember Relapse put out an album under the name of I don't even know who was in that particular version called Goblin Rebirth, and then there was one called Back to the Goblin or something like that.
Yeah,
So
there was Back to the Goblin reunion tour, New Goblin, Goblin Rebirth, New Goblin again, the Goblin Keys, and now Simonetti's Goblin.
right. So a lot of convoluted history there.
Yes.
But Claudio's the OG.
He is.
So you got to respect when he comes around.
Yeah.
know that he's the OG, and you're seeing as close to the OG Goblin as you're going to get.
Exactly. And I think it does sound amazing.
Oh yeah.
And if members aren't going to get along, there's no point in doing this.
Yeah.
You don't need to be As I Lay Dying.
Exactly.
Have you looked at that stuff recently? Because
drama.
Well, if you try to murder your wife,
That's right.
it's going to be a problem.
Exactly. So I think our only criticisms of the show are really more to do with the venue,
Yeah.
because the band itself sounded fantastic.
I just wish we were
the
in a better
acoustics weren't
venue.
great, but the band itself sounded fantastic. All excellent players. Like I said, they did fantastic job of like modernizing those songs, where it needed to be, but still sounding like Goblin. The covers were excellent.
Yeah.
Everything was spot on for me on this. It was one of the best shows. As a fan of both horror and music, it's just like two worlds collided, and that just made it one of the best shows ever because two things I love coming together, in such a wonderful way.
Exactly. And the only other composer that's really stands out with all this is obviously Fabio Frizzi. He did Zombie 2, also known as Zombie, also known as the unofficial
sequel to Dawn of the Dead. Italians did a lot of weird shit in the 70s. There was like unofficial sequels to Dawn of the Dead. There was an unofficial sequel to Alien. They took Godzilla movies and re-edited them and did all kinds of weird of weird stuff going on.
They basically wanted to flood the market with whatever they could. It's almost just like our shitty B movies. There's no reason why you need to put it out, but people do, and so Claudio actually discussed the fact that he was put on some shitty stuff sometimes, and he's like, I don't understand it. The music was good, but the movie sucks, But yeah, Fabio Frizzi, I looked to see if there was ever any bad blood between them, like, I'm better than you. Because I almost wore my Beyond shirt when we went to the show, and I was like, no, that's the opposing team.
You'd think there had to be some rivalry there, because like there was the relationship between Argento and Simonetti kind of mirrored the relationship between Fulci and Fabio Frizzi, Yeah. So.
But they all started out together. Ultimately, they were all in the same office together when the very first stuff was happening in the very first band.
Wow.
So, but if you find an article where it says, they, had it out in an alleyway somewhere, and it was like the Sharks and the Jets, I'd love to read it.
Right.
And Claudio actually had a book at the merch table. It's in Italian.
Yeah, I was excited. I was like, ooh, and then
Yeah. There are some other books out there that when I was doing research, it's not necessarily by him, but it does discuss all the history of this, and that's what I'm probably going to go and read at some point because I'm very curious about this. But we all know Italian horror has a certain sound to it.
Yes.
And synthesizers are it.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a couple that are very specific, but the one that keeps coming back to is the Mellotron.
Right.
And apparently around the time that all of these albums and this kind of stuff was happening was when synthesizers were blowing up.
Right.
And it was just constant, stuff coming out on the market. And Claudio Simonetti, he said, this is really cool that they had so many different things, and he kept getting to learn and see new stuff and hear new things, and I thought that was really rad.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've still kept it to that. Obviously, technology has advanced immensely.
Yeah.
But they've still kept to that sound regardless of it.
Yeah,
and I think that's rad.
And they, in my opinion, were one of the first bands to really embrace that. I think they should be mentioned in the same breath, along with Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream and all those 70s, 60s/70s bands that really were at the dawn of synthesizers and electronic elements in music. I think Goblin doesn't necessarily get the credit they deserve for that because, Italian horror soundtracks is kind of such a niche thing,
Yes.
But I definitely think they should be mentioned along with all those other bands too.
Absolutely. And, I always knew of synthesizers because we grew up in the 80s.
Right.
Huge deal.
Yeah.
Flock of Seagulls. That's the one that always rings in my brain. Is Flock of Seagulls for some. Maybe it's because he's spinning around in circles playing a synthesizer on Eurythmics. But we didn't grow up watching Italian horror.
Right.
So it wouldn't be introduced to us in that way. And I've actually seen kind of like a rebirth of synthesizers over the years. with like the movie It Follows. I can't remember the band name.
Yeah, I don't either off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's like one word. I'll put it in the description or something. But, you know, that's when I started to hear it coming back.
Yes.
And I was like, that's still one of my favorite, not soundtracks, it's a score.
Right.
If there's no lyrics, it's a score.
Yeah.
But I was excited to see that all come back. And I think that also, because our age group are the ones that we're the old people now.
Right.
So we're the
bringing
ones
it back because we didn't necessarily grow up with Italian horror, but we did grow up with John Carpenter.
Yes.
And we did grow up with MTV. So you've got all this synth pop that we're being inundated with from MTV, and then, you know, like John Carpenter movies that, of course, he was one of the early composers of scores in America, at least anyways, to embrace the synthesizer. So I mean, we were kind of, all this synth stuff was going on when we were growing up.
Yes.
You know, and that's why, you know, when I didn't really watch, I definitely didn't watch any Italian horror until probably I was in college. And like, I think I told you, movies were bootlegged onto YouTube, so that's how I saw The Beyond. Somebody had bootlegged it onto YouTube, and I was like, what is this music? You know, and that's I found out about Goblin, and you know, listened to one of their albums of original music. One of the early ones is called Roller, which they did play a couple songs from when we saw them, and I listened to that all the time in college once I discovered it, because I was like, this is amazing, you know. And the whole reason I love synthesizer stuff is because of when I grew up and, you know, the media that we experienced as kids.
Well, and you might all be wondering, why are you guys talking about music? This is about movies. And that is because the music that went along with these movies made it a full package.
Yes.
I think if it had just had some generic music like George Romero had done originally, things like that, it wouldn't have been what it is now.
Right.
And so I feel like, I said this to Josh the other night, because Claudio Simonetti, he said when he was in one of his little breaks between songs, he said when he was a kid that he loved horror movies. It scared the shit out of him, but he absolutely loved them. But he didn't appreciate the music at the time because he was a kid.
Right.
And then as you get older, you start appreciating the music, and you see how important it is to tie those two together.
Right.
And with Josh and I being such huge fans of music itself, it definitely helps the movies along.
Yeah.
Because there are movies that I would say, I'm going to admit it, don't come after me. I am not a huge zombie movie fan because they irritate me because they're so slow. Except for the zombies that decide to start running, you know, and attacking sharks. But other than that, you know, I'm just like, they just drive me nuts. But the music is what keeps me going with it.
Right.
And I think if it didn't have that atmosphere, then I probably wouldn't be watching them as much. I think the music is important to discuss when it comes to horror movies. Some movies have some really shitty music that is not necessary, but I think like It Follows, that music, it definitely keeps you in pace with the movie.
Right.
And that's what John Carpenter did with his, you know, he built his suspense with his movies.
Yep.
I think Goblin's music, because it is progressive, which I'm a dork and I'm a big fan of, and then also has jazz rhythms.
Right.
Those two things are huge to me. So it's not just a song. It's a whole thing. And if I had heard it on its own, I'd probably love it.
Yeah.
And so that to me is important.
Yeah, I think that's the key right there. You know, the music stands on its own. They could have just played and not had the projection in the background, and it still would have been amazing. And we all know what it was, because those, it's hard, you know, it's like it's hard to separate them, but yet when you do, it still stands on its own, you know.
Well, and technically speaking, because of how, you know, how everybody's head was in the way of the projection, you didn't have it, because I can't watch it when it's like that. So I would glimpse back and go, oh, okay, you know, and that would be it. I'd be like, Deep Red, we just covered that.
Right.
I've seen that clip about 40,000 times right now, you know. But it wasn't important to me in any way. Just the stage lighting alone was fine, and the music.
Yeah.
And watching the musicians, because, like I said, that's the important part, in my opinion, is the musicians.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I hope we didn't bore you too much talking about music. There was another episode that we talked about music early on in this channel that nobody wanted to watch.
No.
And you should watch it because we told you to. No, you should watch it because it is important.
Yes.
Some people are just not fans of music. I cannot even grasp that in any way. But whatever. Those who are, definitely go check out that video as well.
Yes.
We also did discuss it in last week's video with Wicker Man, you know, and we will continue to talk about the music in movies because, damn it, we want to.
Exactly. And
that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, thanks for coming around again.
Yes.
Woohoo!
Woo. And if Goblin comes to your town, go see him, because your mind will be blown.
Bro. And we weren't even on drugs.
No. Stone cold sober in our minds. We're still
Yeah.
amazing show. So guys, thanks so much for watching. Let us know in the comments what soundtracks are iconic for you. Have you ever seen Goblin, John Carpenter, any of these people perform live? Let us know what you think in the comments, and keep watching through the rest of Josh-tober because we got some good stuff coming up. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye!